few years ago, my mother, my grandmother, my uncle, and a friend were in Ashcombe, a town in the interior of Illinois, on a trip. On the day they were leaving, my uncle, who was the driver, went through a very disturbing experience and did not feel up to driving. My mother and her friend knew about it, but my grandmother did not, so they spared her from knowing about it, so as not to worry her, and thus they ended up postponing the trip. So, Mom decided to drive instead of my uncle, and my grandmother made up some excuse as to why she had changed drivers. Well, since Ashcombe is more or less 4 or 6 hours from Chicago, they decided to leave around dawn to arrive in town in the morning. However, at that time, and in fact I think even nowadays, the roads don't have any kind of illumination, except for the moon and the stars, which to some extent are not much. Anyway, they left at that time. They traveled for an hour or so until they spotted a parked car, and the driver was outside waving his hand for them to stop. Since in those days the risks of a robbery or kidnapping on the roads were practically non-existent, they stopped the car and checked what the man wanted. The driver of the stranded vehicle was there with his wife and small daughter. The gas in their car had run out, and he was borrowing some. Not caring to give some, Mom turned off the car, and the others got off and stood outside while the gasoline was pumped from one car to the other. While this was going on, they ended up talking and getting to know each other. And so, even after some of the gas was gifted, they turned on the headlights of the car and talked some more. And that's when something sinister started to happen. While they were talking, a girl, in her white robes, not the typical ghostly dress, just normal white robes, walked past them with her head down, and without saying a word, seemingly going on her merry way. Everyone who was talking froze immediately and spotted the woman disappearing into the darkness of dawn. They didn't understand anything, and before long, already frightened, they each got into their own cars. The driver of the other car thanked them for the gas and went on his way, just as Mom did. But it had only been 5 minutes since the girl had passed them, and those 5 minutes were enough for her to totally disappear on that road. After about 2 hours, when they no longer expected to find her, to their surprise, they spotted the girl, still walking alone on the dark road. My mother, not happy that she was walking there just like that, decided to ask where she was going, and if she needed a ride. Everyone was against her doing this, but since she was very curious and had always been the wild one of the family, decided to follow the girl until she pulled up next to her, and called her the girl with long black hair, covering her back, stopped and slowly walked to the car. When she leaned against the window and raised her head, it was enough for everyone inside the car, except Mom, not to dare to say anything else. The woman, who had the body of a girl of about 23 to 25, had the face of an old woman of 80 or so. While everyone froze, she looked at Mom and asked quietly, "Yes?" Mom then plucked up enough courage and asked where she was going. The woman said she was going to Chicago, just like them. Mom then took the plunge and asked if she wanted a ride. By this time, everyone in the car objected to taking her. They were completely terrified. But Mom said that this was rude, and that she would give her a ride. The problem was that all the seats but one in the back were occupied, and those in the back refused to sit there with her. So Mom made a deal. My uncle, still unlike his normal self, risked driving, and Mom switched places with her friend who was in the passenger seat, making him move to the back seat, and shared the passenger seat with his wife, who accepted the ride. After this, they drove off. After the woman got into the car, no one, apart from Mom, dared to say anything. It was as if they were so terrified that they were almost in a state of trance. Then, seeing that they wouldn't say anything, Mom started a conversation with the woman. They started to talk about whatever would take away the fear of the others, but as time went on, Mom, who was sandwiched by the other passengers, found it strange that she couldn't feel the woman's body touching hers. It was as if she wasn't there. The window was open, and the wind that blew did not move a hair of her, who always kept her head down, and her hair covering a good part of her face. So, Mom asked, "Miss Madam, what were you doing out there? Why were you alone?" Then the woman answered, "I was on an outing with 4 other friends, but the car overturned, and they all died at this moment." Even Mom could not deny the shivering. Then she evaluated the whole situation, everything that had already happened, and after rethinking several times, she mustered up some courage and asked, "Excuse me, but have you died already?" It was then that my grandmother finally piped up. "Honey, what kind of question is that?" asked my grandmother nervously. My mother didn't answer right away, but the guest, however, slowly turned her face towards my mother, and with a bit of hair still on her face, she asked, "Do you not think it's appropriate?" Mom then piped up, speaking directly to the guest. "Look, you were walking alone in the middle of the night, on foot, and on a completely dark road. You have a girl's body and an old woman's face. You said you were with your friends in a car, that it had flipped over and that they all died. Well, I think that you died as well." The woman didn't try to argue. Mom didn't understand her reaction, but she understood her silence as a confirmation of her suspicions. Finally, after those words, neither the woman nor anyone else spoke during the rest of the trip. When they finally arrived in Chicago, the woman told them where they could drop her off. When they got to her address, which by the way was on a corner of a typical street, she got off, thanked them for the ride, and walked until she disappeared into the next block. Mom told me that after she disappeared, it began to rain completely out of the blue, as if a single heavy cloud was hovering overhead. Then, after she got out of the car, it seemed that everyone had woken up from their trance, and headed to a friend's house, where they were going to drop him off. But as they turned the next block, the rain stopped the same way it had started, completely out of nowhere, only leaving everyone even more terrified. When they finally arrived at our friend's house, he didn't let them leave until he was able to get inside. He was so desperate that he almost didn't get out of the car and could hardly find the key. He needed my uncle's help to guide him to the door and get him there safely inside. After that, they said goodbye and Mom, Grandma, and Uncle went back home. Mom was also scolded for giving the woman a ride, but she just ignored it. A few days later, still puzzled by the contents of that trip, we drove down the street where we had dropped that woman off. To everyone's astonishment, we found out that the street was behind a cemetery. Fear overtook our minds, and we promised never to pick up another hitchhiker ever again.